Show.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Here to set you free. How you doing? Happy Friday, TGIF. And I'm very grateful and thankful for our guest today. Mr. Tom Conway, President Conway, is president of the United Steelworkers Union, the USW. They are North America's largest industrial union. They have 1.2 million members with an M and retirees. And they are really a strong, if not the strongest, one of the strongest unions in our nation. Not just our nation, though, Canada, the Caribbean as well. They proudly represent men and women who work in nearly every industry there is. And a lot of people think USW just steel. We've gone over that before. And President Conway is the union's most experienced contract negotiator. And not just in steel, in aluminum, oil, and other major industries where USW members work, often directing bargaining during crises. Check them out online, usw.org. That's their website. Also online, follow them on Twitter and Instagram, same handle there, @Steelworkers. More than a pleasure to have back on the program and the first time in this year, 2023. Happy belated New Year, President Conway, President Tom Conway, President of the USW. Thank you for joining us, President Conway. Always a pleasure to have you on the program.
No, it's always good to be back, Leslie. Good to talk to you again.
And likewise. You know, what we're talking about today, I think is so essential, not that just people are aware of it and know about it, but the conversation right now, when you hear about, documents found here or there, what is the question that, people come up with is, did this infringe upon our national security, right? Was national security put at risk? But a lot of times people forget that national security isn't just about documents in garages or Mar-a-Lago. Security requires sound trade policy, right? Manufacturing in certain sectors, key sectors like steel, aluminum, they underpin national security. They provide vital resources for our military. They provide resources to help our nation, meeting just infrastructure as an example. So could you speak to some of these vital resources that manufacturing supplies with relationship to national security?
Oh, look, the nation's national security isn't going to be found in a stack of paper. It stems out of what we make and what we do for ourselves and the ability to protect ourselves in what's become an ever more dangerous world. And the notion that you have to make that stuff. You can't expect to buy it from your enemies or buy it from somewhere else in the world when you need it. And if you don't make the fundamentals and the backbones of your economy, and if you don't mine it and mill it, manufacture it, put labor and capital against it, and make those materials that are fundamental to your ability to have not just a thriving economy, but a safe economy, then you really are kidding yourself that you can rely on the rest of the world to take care of you. So sectors like steel and aluminum and glass and so many others are just crucial to what we have as a nation. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to protect that and having our own sovereignty over it and our own control over those things. And I think America inherently understands that. And we've gone through an era where, you can globalize everything and buy it wherever you want to. And it just doesn't make sense. I think the pandemic taught us that in large way about our medical equipment and our needs there. And slowly the country's beginning to understand that you can't leave yourself defenseless and in that sort of position going forward. So, what you make is really the backbone of what you are. And what made America a powerhouse was our ability to do that and our ability to stand up an industry when we needed to.
Absolutely. Talk to me about Section 232s. I know that since 2018, at least, they've been an essential part of this. For people that aren't familiar with Section 232s are, or for those that are familiar with them but aren't aware how essential a part of all of this they are and why.
Section 232 is a section of the trade laws that give the President of the United States the ability to put a tariff or to bar a product from coming into the country if it's deemed that that product is essential to the national security. So you think of national security and it's about making ships or making tanks, but that's not really what it comes down to. And some portion of our economy goes into those sorts of weaponry, but our national security is dependent upon our electrical grid. It's dependent upon our water systems. It's dependent upon, as we saw 2 weeks ago, a little computer glitch shut down our airlines for a whole day and a half over a corrupted file. Those things have to do with our national security. So 232 gives the administration the ability to declare something a national security asset or industry and provide a protection against it, either through a tariff or a quota, or completely banning that from coming into the country. And that's been used. The Trump administration used it somewhat unwieldingly, but it was used, and the Biden administration has continued it and has kept it strong and has made it modification where there's been, some areas where we've had more friendly nations, the EU, the UK, but in others like China and other nations around the world where we don't have a trusting relationship, then we've used that as the ability to keep that material out of the country and to begin to make it here ourselves. And I think it's a wise use of the nation's trade laws.
Well, when we're faced with global overcapacity and, driven largely, like, you had mentioned China and largely driven by their unfair trade practices, those 232 relief measures, we see the proof in the pudding. I mean, they worked, they continue to work, and they worked and continue to work, as intended, right? So let's break it down a little bit. In steel, what did the 232 relief measures do? And what were they intended to do specifically? For example, regarding industry conditions and things like that.
Well, if you think about the steel industry, there's no reason in the world that the steel industry or the aluminum industry in the United States should be closing facilities and imports growing into that market. And so the country needs to say to itself, well, what is the level of operation that we ought to have here before someone else can come into the market? And look, America's trade and our trading policies go back to the days of the Revolutionary War. We've always been a nation that traded. And that makes sense. That's proper. But there comes a point where, first of all, you take care of yourselves, and then you see where the balance should come from. So in steel, we tried to set a benchmark that said our industry ought to be running at 80% before someone else can come in here and undercut it and force the closure of mills and force the shutdown of jobs in the U.S. and harm U.S. communities and ship right into those communities. And so, and that became sort of the basis for those 232s. And we still work hard at adhering to that, to making sure that we can keep our industry running at a sustained level. And it then spurs investment, and it spurs companies to continue to reinvest. They have the certainty of a market. They know that something's going to be there. They don't have to run offshore, and you can incent them to build here domestically and provide jobs and a future in a community and have good thriving businesses and good unionized jobs. So it really is sort of common sense
Yeah.
But you put it in the hands of a bunch of economists, and all of a sudden they dream up jargon and words. But people inherently know there's a lot of foolishness. You're chasing a product where labor is exploited, the
Right.
environment is ignored, and they can make it cheaper. And if all you're ever going to worry about is price point, you're going to find yourself in trouble. Someone will always work cheaper.
Absolutely, President Conway. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with President Conway, President of the United Steelworkers, the USW. Please check out their website. They do a lot more than just steel, usw.org. On Twitter and Instagram, follow them there at Steelworkers. We'll continue talking about national security and not just steel, infrastructure, manufacturing, more after this.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games with my boys.
I want to get back to feeling and touching, connecting with the people around me.
I want to get back to family dinners and my grandma's mac and cheese.
I want to get back to real grocery shopping, taking my time, walking down every aisle, smelling the tomatoes and melons, having a free sample or two, or 3.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now, there are vaccines. And they are the first step that let us get back to feeling optimistic about the days ahead of us. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Now, get the facts. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey, sis, missed you this morning. Kim told me you weren't feeling well, so I'm just doing a self-care check.
Oh, thank you, friend.
How you doing?
Girl, listen, my energy was so low because I didn't eat breakfast when I got up, so I had to miss virtual yoga with y'all.
Trust me, I understand.
But I'm doing much better now that I've eaten, so I'm back on track.
Great. In that case, let's get some steps in tonight. I'll come over and we can walk around the lake.
Sounds good. Appreciate you being in my business, too. Now, let me get in yours. Did you check your blood pressure today?
I did that and my squats, okay?
Okay.
High blood pressure is not going to be my friend if I can help it. See you at 6?
Let's get it. See you then.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Check in on one another and be a part of a healthy blood pressure movement. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the Pressure Coalition and the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the Flint Women's Emergency Brigades were founded. Genora Johnson, a socialist, was a main leader of the Women's Auxiliary Number 10 throughout the strike. A different kind of auxiliary, it built the leadership skills of women through classes in labor history and public speaking. It also set up a first aid station and child care center, raised strike funds, and walked the picket lines. The Women's Auxiliary was transformed through its actions at the Battle of Bull Run when the women put their bodies between the strikers and the police. According to Janet Hazzett, the women moved beyond supporting the strike to participating in it. 50 women signed up the next day. By the end of the strike, over 300 women had joined. The women adopted an official uniform of red berets and red armbands. They were armed with clubs to smash factory windows when police gassed the sit-downers. Their participation in the strike was heroic, and their work continued after the victory. They sought to represent the interests of women auto workers, who often found co-workers less than welcoming and experienced sexual harassment and occupational discrimination at the hands of supervision. Many women auto workers formed the core leadership of several chapters. Historian Nancy Gabin notes that this was not always the appropriate arena for advocacy, saying, quote, "By encouraging women workers to participate in the auxiliaries, the UAW abdicated its responsibility to these workers." However, Johnson emphasized, it was a radical change to give women a right to participate in discussions with their husbands, with other union members, with other women, to express their views. That was a radical change for those women at that time. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
And we're back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Our guest is President Tom Conway, President of the United Steelworkers, the USW. Check out their website, usw.org. On Twitter and Instagram, follow them there at Steelworkers. President Conway, thank you for holding and welcome back. With regard to national security and the relationship that manufacturing has with national security in this country, I want to talk about a recent ruling. And this is a ruling by the World Trade Organization, the WTO. There are many out there that feel it was not only deeply flawed, but also dangerous. Could you talk to us about this ruling by the WTO?
Yeah, look, as part of the effort to do all the globalization and frankly, much of the deindustrialization that took place, a World Trade Organization was formed. And in the formation of it, as countries joined, they agreed to join a panel that would settle disputes and where quarrels would arise between countries. And these panels have sort of just kind of taken off and heading in the wrong direction. And so when the administrations here put the 232s in place, a bunch of countries complained and went to the WTO and said the United States has no right to bar us from their market. And they can't use this national defense argument, and the WTO needs to knock that rule down. And this panel of 3 judges, academics, lawyers, actually, they don't even have to reveal who they are. They decided that the United States was in violation of their rules and that we had to dismantle the 232s. That is way out of line. I mean, any nation and any other nation out there has a right to decide their own sovereignty issues, what their own national security issues are, and some anonymous panel somewhere to allow that to happen is just foolish. So this WTO ruling is way out of line, way beyond the parameters of whatever was contemplated by the WTO and the original rules of it. And frankly, the U.S., I think rightfully, is going to ignore it and continue to do what it's doing. But it highlights the danger of sort of entering into an agreement that can be so badly misused and sort of turned against you. And so the United States needs to take really a good hard look at its current trade arrangements, how they actually operate, whether or not you're turning over your own autonomy into the hands of some other organization largely represented not in your interests. And so when we talk about trade reform and the need to revamp America's trade laws and the way that we do business with the rest of the world, this sort of highlights the problem that the WTO and these panels have kind of run amok. And countries who have joined the WTO, China, for example, said they wanted to be a member of the WTO, but along the way, ignore what they want to and are, very predatory and decide they're going to target industries in the U.S. And so you just sort of need to take stock of where you stand and whether or not you need to continue in that kind of relationship. And we've been urging administrations for a long time that you have to take a real look at this and take a step back and make sure that you're protecting yourself and your own industry and the workers in your nation.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the WTO has no standing to interfere with national security. So this is clearly beyond overreach, right?
Well, look, what it can do, they can't make you undo your law. But what they can then is open up the rest of the world to say, okay, you can put a tariff against U.S. products. You can retaliate against them. And so it can open up a whole period of retaliation that's unnecessary and really can impede trade when when they really stepped into an arena that they had no right to be in. So, look, I guess if it brings that sort of behavior from other nations and they decide they're going to retaliate and not accept U.S. goods, that begins the tension of having, widespread trade battles. But sometimes you got to have that sort of battle or the threat of a battle in order to protect yourself. And so while countries do a lot of saber rattling and say, well, we're not going to accept U.S. goods, people want access to the U.S. market. It's the largest market in the world, the most affluent, and our nation, regardless of what people think of it at times, it is the place where folks want to do business and can trust it to do business. And so, there's a lot here that the world wants to be part of, and I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater to allow that to go on.
No, it's a very good point. When you talk about being a part of, should China have been allowed to join the WTO? I mean, I know it happened more than 20 years ago, but the Chinese Communist Party leverages its position. China continues its predatory practices. Why is the WTO on board with this, and why have they been for 2 decades?
China is what's called a non-market economy. I mean, it doesn't run by normal market rules. It's governed and controlled by a communist party who sets the rules of the economy, who certainly isn't run by any sort of democratic practice. And they have an ability to do whatever they want at any time. And so they'll target industries here in the U.S. and make a 5-year plan about how they're going to take over an industry here, undercut it in pricing, dump in products until they're able to sort of buy away all the customers, and then they're going to be in charge of it. And that pattern of conduct by the CCP, by the Communist Party of China, it's shown itself over and over and over. And if an American company wants to do business in China, they're going to have to go over there and do what they call a technology transfer. So if you had blueprints for something you wanted to manufacture in China, you're going to turn those blueprints over. They're going to translate them into Mandarin, and in a few years, they're going to be making that product. And so you might get into China's market for a year or two before they're making it on their own under the control of the state. And American business has had the wool pulled over its eyes multiple times on this. This is not a secret to anyone. And so allowing them into the WTO on the same basis as anyone else when they are officially a non-market economy is just a foolish approach to things and should never have happened the way it did.
Absolutely. We're going to take another break. We'll be back with President Tom Conway, president of the United Steelworkers. Please check out their website, usw.org. Go to Twitter and Instagram. Follow them there at Steelworkers. We'll continue to talk about national security, manufacturing, and the relationship between those two with President Conway right after this.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
911, what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken, and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WAC, where we shine a light on America's callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Day, we're looking at what injustice in healthcare looks like for insured people. How is it that even those with health insurance face crushing medical debt in America? What choice do patients really have when they find themselves fighting for their lives and unable to pay the exorbitant costs for their care? And what far-reaching impact can medical debt have? To find out, we spoke to Monique Davis, a nonprofit executive living in Southern California. She was diagnosed with amyloidosis, a rare medical condition, in 2016 that required her to have several rounds of treatment and a stem cell transplant. She had health insurance, but the treatments and multiple ambulance rides still left Monique and her husband with thousands of dollars of medical debt, relentless harassment from debt collectors, and a ruined credit score.
The ambulance companies were actually the worst. I mean, even when the hospitals would call, they were at least polite, right? Like they politely demanded money, but the ambulance companies were rude. They would yell at us. They would, say all kinds of awful things. And they would call at all hours of the day. And like I said, they would call at work, and they would call frequently throughout the day. And so that was stressful. It was scary because we didn't know if they would threaten us, like, we're going to take you to court, we're going to take your paycheck. So we were scared.
Get the full Code WAC story on progressivevoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcast. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome back. Happy Friday. And we're happy to have with us President Tom Conway. President Conway is president of the United Steelworkers, 1.2 million members and retirees strong here in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean. Go to their website, www.usw.org, to find out more. And also follow them on Instagram and Twitter. Also more information at Steelworkers. President Conway, thank you for holding. Welcome back. We are talking about national security. We're talking about how critical trade is to that national security. And I don't think we could have that conversation without talking about another aspect of, national security. And that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how that reinforces just how critical trade is to national security. Could you talk to us about that? And, I'm thinking about, aluminum, as, a starting point or a jumping point with this discussion.
Yeah. Well, right now, Russia had traditionally been a big exporter of aluminum around the world, and particularly into the United States. And unfortunately, there is still a significant amount of Russian aluminum coming into the United States. And this aluminum, and one of the biggest Russian aluminum companies, its earnings repatriate back into the Putin war chest. And so by buying Russian aluminum here in the United States, you're essentially handing dollars to the Putin regime to underwrite its war effort in the Ukraine. And if you're going to sanction Russia, then you need to get serious about it. And so the amount of Russian aluminum coming to the U.S. is frankly been sort of stunning. And we've been talking a lot to the administration in the last month and a half or 2 months or so, and I believe making progress on that. But at the same time, the U.S. has gone from a time having maybe 10, 11 aluminum smelters in the country to operating to down to 3.5, 4, and some are on crippled business. And one closed in Kentucky here about 6 months ago, and it was the last smelter in the U.S. that made what's called high purity aluminum for military applications. So right now, the U.S. doesn't have the capability for making high purity aluminum that goes into the F-35, that goes into military applications, that go into a bunch of other aerospace applications. And it's been coming out of Russia. Now, it's really unsustainable. I mean, first you're going to have to make a plan for being able to make that material here again and shut down the Russian materials. And so it sort of demonstrates that without kind of an industrial policy and a thoughtfulness that the way the nation allows itself to run and allows its businesses to run and the decisions that it makes, and to make sure that there was a time when they took an eye and they watched towards antitrust issues and make sure that they weren't owning all the sources of competition, but really didn't pay any attention at all to whether or not business practices were working against the national interests of the nation as a nation as a whole. And look, we have a right to do that. The president has at his authority the Defense Production Act. We have the ability to do it, and we need to begin to use it. So, here we find ourselves on short supply of aluminum, and not just aluminum. Titanium is another example. In order to make titanium, which is so essential going into the use of military applications, in medical equipment, in civilian applications, but America doesn't make a product called titanium sponge, which is the foundation of making the metal titanium, and we don't make it here anymore. So those sorts of things, along with fiber optics, and this list goes on, whether it's going to be offshore wind, whether it's going to be solar panels, America needs to be making that. And we're at a turning point where we've made, finally and rightfully, some significant investments in an infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and a CHIPS and Science bill. And America is investing both in climate and in jobs. And climate has a lot to do with trade. So if you're going to clean up your climate and clean up your carbon, you need to do it with equipment that you build here. If you're just going to bring it offshore from a place that it's made dirty, you're not doing much for the environment, and you're not doing much with your taxpayer dollars. So there needs to be a coherent strategy about how we're going to deploy that money. And I think this administration's working hard at doing that.
No, I would agree. Energy prices caused by this war between Russia and Ukraine, they've hurt European aluminum producers, right? Not just the United States. Does that further leave markets open to those exports from Russia?
Well, look, Germany and some of the other places were dependent upon Russian oil, Russian energy that came out of there, Ukraine in the way of food and grain, and caused the food shortage. There were a lot of materials that shipped out of those regions, and so they have caused a shortage. And that's what price spikes have been, and we've seen that in energy prices here as well. I believe it levels out over time, and I think you need to bring alternative sources on. And I think people are working quickly at trying to figure out a way to do that. But it's going to take a little time, and there'll be some struggles in the meantime. But look, energy prices will level out, and you can't control the behavior of that nation and what they're doing without getting some economic pressure brought against it, and it's got to be real and significant.
No, absolutely. Looking forward, and when you look at domestic production, when you look at sound trade policy, there's another essential aspect of our national security, and that's meeting our energy needs. But President Conway, let me ask you this. There is tremendous potential, and you've told me this and others at the USW and other unions, in areas like offshore wind. The Biden administration, they're working to build our domestic industry. They're working to secure the supply chain in this industry that will need to be successful. We already know Europe has a significant lead over us there. China's ramping up its production. Is there a concern with you as president of the USW and among unions, so not just the USW, but across the board, with Republicans having taken over the House and with their attitude toward renewable energy sources and alternative energy sources?
Look, I think our union also represents oil workers in refineries across the country. And so while we understand all the concerns about carbon and making sure that the atmosphere is clean and that there's the right kind of carbon capture, sequestration programs put in place, and there is equipment for that, we understand too that there's a transition going on in the world, but we think it can happen all at the same time, and it doesn't have to come at the expense of each other. And so while we're building up a world that's leading towards electrification, for example, in the vehicle fleet, you're going to need the materials you're going to need in order to meet that demand in copper, in lithium, in nickel, and in lightweighting is tremendous. And the country needs to be able to respond to that. And so this is a long-term project that we're on. And this is really sort of a fundamental change in the way we think about things. And energy needs will change, but they're not all going to change overnight. And there's still going to be a need for fossil fuels as clean as possible that can be made. And there's going to be a need for solar. But a lot of these countries are ahead of us, and we've got to do a lot of catching up. And I think we're working at it as quickly as we can. And at the same time, preserving the good jobs that are out there. And, people talk about a just transition. It's sort of a foolish notion that you're going to take someone who's worked at a refinery for $40 an hour and put them in a job at a solar plant making 14, and they're going to be happy about that. That's not the kind of transition America has to make. And you can't do this on a low-wage strategy. So we've got to make sure that the jobs we're preserving and creating are paying the right kind of livable, family-sustaining wages that need to come along with these changes. But
that's an excellent.
There's a lot on our horizon.
Yeah, excellent point, and something that people do bring up as a concern. Exactly what you mentioned. Like, why do I leave this established industry for something newer if I'm going to take a pay cut? When it's uncertain. We'll be back with President Tom Conway, president of the United Steelworkers. Check them out online. Check out their website, usw.org. On Twitter and Instagram, follow them at Steelworkers. We'll be back right after this. Don't go away.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines, and they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most, like spreading the word without spreading concern, girls tripping instead of solo sipping, brunching instead of late night munching, and talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. It's okay to have questions about COVID-19 vaccines.
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Is it safe?
Can I trust it?
What about pre-existing conditions?
Now get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when COVID-19 vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey, it's Stephanie Miller. Here's what we're talking about. Did I mention that Kevin McCarthy, the aforementioned piece of he is just a coward? Not just that he took amazing congresspeople off of committees that were well qualified. He put Marjorie Taylor Greene on Homeland Security. She's an insurrectionist, and she was a 9/11 denier in charge of Homeland Security. Yes. Someone that previously has said 9/11 was a hoax. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
And someone who said that there are Satan-worshiping people in government.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, I can add that.
Yes.
She's also on the Oversight Committee with Paul Gosar and Lauren Boebert.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
That's new today.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Because Steve Bannon made a great point on Twitter. An FBI official is on record as saying Eric Swalwell is, quote, under no suspicion of wrongdoing. There is something amazing about watching McCarthy engage in actual McCarthyism. Right? What did he say yesterday? If you saw what I saw from the FBI, you wouldn't have Swalwell on any committee. That is exactly the opposite of what the FBI has said. Mm-hmm. On 3 separate occasions, in fact, they thanked him for cooperating immediately when they notified him of this Chinese spy or whatever.
He did everything right.
As a dog lover, what would be the worst thing you could hear about George Santos?
Oh.
Let's say you appreciate our veteran service and you are a dog lover.
I mean,
what if you were going to make up something about, not that you would make things up about George Santos like he would.
Well, all I know is that George Santos used a Jewish last name so that it would get more money, too.
Yes. More money from Jews. Yes, there's that. But that's not the main story for me this morning. The main story.
The dog.
Yeah, this is pretty.
He stole a veterans dying dog's GoFundMe money.
Yeah.
And the dog died, and so did the vet. Oh, my God. His fake dog charity. So he stole the money. He stole the money from a dying dog and a veteran. Find the Stephanie Miller Show every Monday through Friday at 9 to noon Eastern, 6 to 9 Pacific, right here on Progressive Voices.
We are back. Happy Friday. Welcome back. Talking with President Tom Conway, president of the United Steelworkers Union. And I want you to check out their website, find out all that they do. It's a lot more than steel, usw.org. And Twitter and Instagram, their handles is at Steelworkers. Follow them there, at Steelworkers on Twitter and Instagram. We're talking about national security with relationship to manufacturing. And there's a huge correlation and why it's so necessary. And we're having this conversation because I don't think enough people are aware of it. President Conway, again, thank you for holding and welcome back.
Thank you.
The previous administration, when Donald Trump was president, they pretty much made it clear that we can't exist in a vacuum when it comes to trade. Can you speak to us about that? Because it would seem that the former administration and this administration at least are in agreement on that, right? So this isn't necessarily Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative. You know, this is something where most Americans and most of our legislators, our elected officials, are on the same page, correct?
Yeah, I think for the most part that's true. I think this, as I think I was saying earlier, there's been a bit of a sea change, even amongst the economists who touted a global economy just 15 and 20 years ago, have begun to see that, it didn't make much sense, and it actually harmed countries. And the promises that were made weren't delivered. The promises under the original NAFTA, the promises of the WTO, brought harm about them. Brought particular harm to the United States. We lost 60,000 factories and 6 million jobs, and so I think any politician who wants to be a national leader in this country, to think that you can't come together and come up with coherent policies about how to move forward, particularly with regards to countries like China and some of the rest of Asia, and some of the predatory practices that are out there that are designed to take your markets and do harm to your nation. There's no reason in the world that this has to be a partisan issue. And so I think the Trump administration, the former USTR, Bob Lighthizer, and the current administration with the Department of Commerce and the USTR, Catherine Tai and Gina Raimondo, I think they work together and fit together in a lot of ways. And I think we're finally beginning to have a discussion and a conversation in the United States about the need to take care of ourselves first and how we're going to do that. And so, you know, as you see this administration moving forward with all this investment that is going into the country, and it will take a while as it begins to implement and come online, there's a Buy American component to so much of it, to transportation, to energy, to manufacturing, to new energy and clean energy, and even within the auto industry and the restructuring of the auto industry, and the way that the internal combustion engine is deployed. So I think those are healthy signs, and those are signs of administrations and politicians who are beginning to understand, you know, the future of this country depends on the country's ability to make things and to make a product and bring it to a market and supply the rest of the world with American-made quality products that we always have done. And you see it now with this administration has an effort underway called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and where they're trying to build a coalition of countries who can sort of stand against the economic might and predatory practice of China, and form the right kind of partnership together to move forward without it being a trade agreement that transfers product across each other's line, and to just get the right kind of coalition and pillars in place and work together on clean energy and on trade. And look, you know, you can't keep foreign policy and trade completely separate so they have nothing to do with each other. They are separate issues and largely get dealt with differently. But it'd be naive to think that in a world where foreign policy is so fraught with peril, trade doesn't enter into the discussions. But I think it can be done fairly and the right way, and you build willing partners working together in the kind of coalitions that we're seeing coming together right now around support of the Ukraine. And I think this administration in America needs to lead those efforts. So I'm actually sort of feel positive about the way things are going right now, and that we're going to build the right kind of jobs and good jobs for American workforce, and train a workforce up to meet those needs. And moving forward, I think 5 or 10 years from now, people are going to see that this was, you know, very successful, made a lot of sense, and has positioned the country much better off than we would have been otherwise.
I'm glad that you mentioned, because you read my mind, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework from this administration, because I think a lot of times when people talk about us coordinating with trusted partners in trade, we think about the EU, we think about the UK, you know, we certainly think about countries in the EU like Germany, France, you know, that as an example. You know, a lot of people have spoken about you as well, that this administration's Indo-Pacific Economic Framework contains important priorities that include strong labor, environmental standards. You know, it is essential that an agreement, or any agreement, but an agreement like this especially, adheres to work-centered values. Is it also essential that the United States be sure and be picky about the partners they select because these partners need to be serious about realizing these goals as well going forward.
Well, look, they should learn something from the last time they picked a partner in China.
Yep.
Who just sort of got in the club and then burned the place down. So, if you're going to go around and build a coalition out of 12, 13, 14 nations, you don't pick a nation who's got terrible labor standards or child labor standards or is crushing unionized workforces or exhausting their economy and their environment just to make a product and get it to a market. And so the nation's going to need to be discerning who they're going to do business with. But, that strikes me as sort of common sense. And, like everybody's not going to be on the same playing field, the same level, and there'll be some leveling up that needs to take place. But if you have a regime that's inherently untrustworthy, then don't go do a deal with them. And so I think that's sort of the overall guide here, is that when you're going to pick partners here, pick one who you can trust and do business with, and that you have, mutual issues you can move forward together on.
Yeah, because we definitely want to reduce how much we're importing. We want to have more made in America products, but we have to have trade partners because we certainly want to export more products, and we want to offset that deficit. You had mentioned that you're feeling confident, you're feeling good, when it comes to all of this moving forward. Do you think that we're going to see consumers have a larger demand for made in America products, and that will, force the hands of some of these larger manufacturers, and also this legislation, where we have to have a certain percentage of these, vital elements like aluminum and steel. They have to be domestic, as opposed to in the past when, some people would buy the cheaper steel from China, as an example.
Look, sometimes I think you have to have a rule in place, legislation, a regulation, in order to get people to pay attention and do what they're supposed to. And we've come through a generation of sort of big box era, and people have gotten this appetite that they can get everything cheap. But the truth is, if you keep buying stuff as cheap as you can find it, it eventually puts you out of work, and then you can't afford any of it. So you maybe got to pay a few extra pennies for something in order to make it here. But if that's got your community thriving, if it's providing other jobs in your region and in your neighborhood, those are investments, and they shouldn't be seen as necessarily a cost. And it's the cost of living in a country that has the promise of America, that people do have the ability to have decent lives here, and they're not living in abject poverty, and they're not living like some other places around the world. And so, look, I think it doesn't mean that prices are going to go crazy. I think the inflation that's going on right now is beginning to subside. A lot of it had to do with the pandemic. A lot of it had to do with understanding that we didn't have products here, and we're getting fleeced a little bit by not making our own, and a built-up consumers sat at home for 18 months or 2 years before being able to spend, and now they're out and they've been doing some spending. But I think America's consumers are smart and understand the nature of the markets and what pricing looks like, and don't necessarily have to chase the cheapest price. And I think technology here, manufacturing methods, the way we can do things, we can make things pretty competitive in this country, and that makes the country thrive. And you don't have to take something that's made in a dirty way,
right,
exploited way, or made by children somewhere else around the world, or made by slave labor, or when you look at the work that was done to put the FIFA World Cup organization together and the exploitive nature that was done there, that doesn't need to be going on. And America shouldn't be a part of that.
Absolutely. Very well said. President Conway, the hour just flew by. I always enjoy having you on. I learned something. I know our listeners and viewers do as well. President Tom Conway, President of the United Steelworkers. Once again, check out their website, usw.org. On Twitter, follow them at Steelworkers. On Instagram, follow them at Steelworkers as well. I'm Leslie Marshall. Our executive producer is Mark Grimaldi. We hope you have a wonderful and a safe weekend, and we look forward to speaking with you and with our